Good afternoon, all our participants, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Joint Chamber of Commerce webinar on nearshoring from Ukraine and the impact of COVID-19. My name is Dorit Sallis. I'm the Managing Director of the Joint Chamber of Commerce, which is the leading private sector organization in Switzerland that promotes bilateral business between Switzerland, Eastern Europe, that's non-EU, Central Asia, and the South Caucasus. We are headquartered in Zurich, Switzerland, with members throughout Switzerland and in our target markets, including Mobilunity. Ukraine is a key market in our portfolio of 13 countries that JCC promotes. So we are very happy to showcase Ukraine's strength as a nearshoring market destination for Swiss and other EU companies. I think by now it's stating the obvious when I say that we are living in unprecedented times. Coronavirus has upended our lives and demanded a new approach to doing business, beginning with our Chamber of Commerce. But this, of course, extends to companies. Digitization and operating remotely is the order of the day. Hence, it is, I think, particularly relevant to take a close-up look at the nearshoring model, which relies so deeply on digitization. In today's webinar, we will discuss nearshoring as a model and how current global trends have affected the digitalization of various industries. We welcome our JCC member, as I said, the Ukraine-based IT company Mobilunity, who will explore the pros and cons, as well as the future of the Swiss-Ukrainian nearshoring relationship. This will be followed by testimony from an entrepreneur about his nearshoring experiences. Before proceeding, I guess Elfie might also tell you just to please mute your audio functions during the webinar unless you are prompted by the moderator, i.e. me. For now, only I and the speakers will be permitted to use their audio functions. You are invited to ask the speakers questions by using the chat function during the presentation. I will, of course, open the floor to questions after each presentation. That will be limited in time, but we will have time to discuss topics in greater detail during the Q&A segment. Following the last presentation. And if you want the speaker's contact details and you don't have direct connection to them, just let me know and I will send them to you in an email. Now let's begin. I invite our first speaker, Alfonsine, known as Elfie Williams, Director of Business Development of Mobilunity, Kiev, Ukraine. Elfie has spent the better part of 10 years working within business development as a consultant and at an executive director level, while also traveling the world, exploring various business cultures and processes before ultimately settling in Ukraine. As Director of Business Development for Mobilunity, Elfie brings his experiences not only to promote business opportunities, but to educate and bridge cultural gaps so that business owners from around the globe can fully understand what Ukraine has to offer. Elfie, the screen is yours.
Well, thank you a lot for the wonderful introduction. No pressure there, right, at all. So to all of our participants, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us here. And as Dorit mentioned, a lot of what it is I am engaged in has to do not just with, of course, sales processes, but more about the benefits of nearshoring, what it is, what clients can expect, what are the difficulties, and just having honest conversations with people. So in that regard, when we talk about nearshoring, in the past, one of the major issues that has been shown to really deter companies is the fact that, well, how do we know we can trust you, right? Everything is built off of trust, whether it's IT, sales, no matter what it is, there must be a trust element in whatever it is you're doing. In the past, no one wanted to work with someone that was remote, or very few people, or it was very difficult to convince someone in traditional industries to work with someone that will not be sitting in the same office as they are. In that regard, I think everyone knows that's changed, right? And now everyone is basically either at home part of the time or working remotely, and technology has made that a lot easier. Being in Ukraine, we've seen that this shift has gone across every industry. So even though COVID-19 has issued many challenges to businesses, those challenges tend to be positive, and it forces those companies to really invest in digitalization. That is something that as a businessman, I look at and see a lot of opportunity. And I also look deeper and wonder, why has there not been more engagement in regard to nearshoring in general? Not just say to Ukraine, but to other locations as well, where the same issues or same pain points would apply. So what I hope to do is answer just a few questions that, that people may have, tell you a bit more about what processes to look for, and then of course add some healthy dialogue with the Q&A, and let Phillip, of course, our second panelist, take over at some point as well. So I'll try not to speak too long, even though I like to talk. So the first thing I believe that many companies need to look for are the risks. What risk do you have, especially when you're nearshoring in Ukraine, which is not a part of the EU? Now, honestly speaking, most of the risks that you're going to have are going to be the same risk you have, I believe, with any type of engagement, especially if it's remote. Being an EU member does not necessarily mean that there's going to be zero risk involved. When it comes to risk, there are a lot of important questions to ask vendors when it comes to what type of security personnel do you have? What type of standards do you have when it comes to actually monitoring data? What policies do you have within your company? These are things that are all going to be mitigated by the actual process of interviewing your vendor and understanding what you need personally as a potential client when it comes to nearshoring. There's always fear of data breach. There's always fear that somebody will, say, steal intellectual property. These are things that I believe a good company can show you that they're capable of alleviating and ensure that you have confidence and trust in them as a provider. So these are things that, in terms from a consulting point of view, I always look at it and say that this is something that you need to ask. You need to be very specific in your questions to understand if it's something that you can actually use. Another issue is the model itself. Many people are familiar with traditional outsourcing. Traditional outsourcing is different than what you would call nearshoring. Some people say outstaffing. Some people say body leasing. I never like that term. It sounds weird, leasing a body, but I've heard it before. And what happens is there's not a clear understanding of the difference. All right. With Mobilunity, for example, we're different. What we do is we build teams. Right. So that means that someone like Phillip, for example, would be running an actual team, whereas they have an expertise and we provide experts. However, many people are used to traditional outsourcing, which is fine depending on the need. Traditional outsourcing is when, and many of our participants likely know this, but traditional outsourcing would be, I need something finished from A to Z. I need you to work on this. Here's my budget. Here's my timeline. Send it back to me finished, right? You don't necessarily see all of the processes, but if you choose the right vendor, you can get a good product delivered to you and you can take things from there. Ours, on the other hand, says that there's going to be some responsibility on your end as a client in terms of management. So when we get into these different models, a lot of it comes down to, from a vendor perspective, asking, do you have a technical director? Have you ever managed a project? Do you understand what is needed in regard to running a team? This should be a two-pronged process where obviously as a vendor, you want to make sure you can give the best service. But sometimes our clients aren't necessarily ready for that. So we may advise them to go into outsourcing, for example, until they get to the point where they can actually manage a team, so to speak. So when we look at all of the various aspects of what nearshoring is and what it could be, it still comes down to the trust elements. It still comes down to having conversations, sometimes difficult conversations about expectations, about budgeting, about process. But at the end of the day, most of these things will still be alleviated by having processes in place and clear communication when it comes to the vendor-client relationship. Now, many people look at nearshoring for different reasons. Some look at it as an extension to recruitment, right? Maybe there's just not enough people available and you need to have another recruitment center, for example. So that is one reason why we see people now currently recruiting, say, in Ukraine, but located in Switzerland, for example. There's only so much talent to go around. So these are very important decisions that need to be made strategically to ensure that, one, nearshoring is necessary, and two, that the processes are in place so that you can have a successful engagement, so to speak. So when we look at COVID-19, when we look at the current situation everybody's in globally, for example, I see a lot of potential in the model itself. And of course, obviously, I'm business development, so I want people to understand that this is something they can benefit from. And as a businessman, I could benefit from that as well. But genuinely speaking, now that working remote is no longer a gap, now that everyone is readjusting their processes, and we've seen that you can work from home just as efficiently depending on the field and the expertise needed. Now, any barrier that was there before really is gone, or it's slowly diminishing, because even being in Ukraine, I have calls daily with people from around the globe. There's never an issue in regards to connection. We have ways of making sure that security is not an issue at all. I'm pretty sure Phillip will tell you, more about that as well, because you do have to keep these things in mind. But look at how we're communicating now through Zoom, through various processes and channels. Everyone is looking for, say, the next big thing. In my opinion, it's not necessarily the next big thing. It's just that something like COVID has really opened people's eyes into what's already available. So now, from a company perspective, we've seen a lot more intrigue into the model. We've had, say, clients who a year ago said, not quite sure I trust it, to now saying, okay, how about we give it a shot? Let's give it a try. Let's see what happens. All because we've all been put in this situation where we have to adapt. And this has been a year, I believe, of adaptation, of growth, change. And that is something that I think is well suited for the model of nearshoring, whereas you can be flexible, whereas you can have people who you are comfortable working with, whereas you can build connections remotely and still be able to have progress. Many people are just learning that now. But for those who have embraced this change, for those who are looking for something that can help boost, say, morale, boost production, when we look at nearshoring, especially during these times, I really see potential there. And I believe that even though it may not be marketed as such, or you may not see many companies saying that they are actually, say, nearshoring, what's going to happen is you'll probably see, if you start looking through some of their pages, you'll see they have development centers in other places that are not their headquarters. And with that being said, you'll also find that maybe they even have developers in Eastern Europe somewhere, Ukraine, or maybe other locations, and they've been using this model for years. So adapting to COVID-19 plays hand in hand with what nearshoring is and what it has been for years. And Europe is well situated for that because well, Europe's been nearshoring, I think before nearshoring was a word. It's us Americans that are a bit difficult to deal with from time to time. But I see a lot of potential in growth, and I really look forward to what the future will bring. It's obviously times are tough, but I do see a lot of positive things that can come from, say, COVID, for example. It's just the silver lining that you look for in terms of development.
May I interject at this point, Alfie?
Please.
I'm a lay person in this respect, so I was wondering if we could just sort of go down to some basics here. Now, nearshoring, is it something that would work for you if you are a software development company, or can it be used also for companies' more traditional manufacturing spheres?
Yes. Yes and yes. So most of the time, in terms of nearshoring, we do tend to think IT, software development. I believe that is probably one of the easiest things to nearshore. However, I've also spoken to companies that have a similar process in terms of manufacturing. Now that involves more of a commitment though, because if you're talking about manufacturing, obviously there will be software systems within what you're doing from a manufacturing point of view. But there is, say, a deeper investment in terms of having a physical location, having actual hardware and equipment to work with on site. I think in that regard, it is nearshoring, especially if you're not looking to set up a subsidiary. And really that aspect of nearshoring kind of comes down to the management of it. Not necessarily that everything is going to be put in one location, but it will still be nearshore in another location, Ukraine, for example, and the management will still be, say, in Switzerland. So in that regard, it is very similar to traditional nearshoring. The only difference is you will likely make a bigger investment in terms of manufacturing as opposed to software development, just because the only hardware you really need in software development is, well, a computer, right? Whereas everything else, depending on what you're manufacturing, if you're an automobile manufacturer, for example, or if you're creating clothing and apparel and things like that, you'll need a lot more equipment. You'll be renting a lot more things, but you can still have someone local run it while you manage it from abroad. So in that regard, I'd say yes.
This might be just semantics, but in what sense is that different from outsourcing?
Mm-hmm. So the difference I see is that when we talk about outsourcing, and I'm taking this from a software development point of view generally, but when I hear outsourcing, whether it's software, whether it's manufacturing, that's when you give a process over completely. As in you say, let's talk about manufacturing. Let's say, okay, I want you to make all of these things for me, make guitars for me, make all these guitars for me, give them back to me finished, and then we're done, okay? That is what I would see as traditional outsourcing. Nearshoring, in my avenue, is when you say, look, I'm gonna work with you directly. I'm still gonna manage things, even though you may be doing the manufacturing. So it's still going to be, it's not gonna be made in China, for example. It may be made in China for my company. You're the one that's doing it, but I'm still managing the process. I still have a say. I've not given everything away to you. I basically said that I'm going to work together with you. We're going to have a relationship. I know what you're doing because you work directly with me, versus just a traditional outsourcing role where it's here. I don't care how you do it. Just give it back to me finished, and then hands clean, we're done.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I can give my take on the definition and the difference between both. To me, outsourcing is buying a result, buying a product, finished or semi-finished, while outsourcing is hiring competencies and driving these competencies to achieve whatever goal you have.
That would
and
be
these goals can change. That would be nearshoring, compared to outsourcing, where you really buy a result. You buy a final product or a piece of code or a piece of hardware. You really buy a result.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. That clarifies things well. I don't want to hog the floor here, the virtual floor. Maybe the audience has some questions directly to Alfie at this point, because I know I have lots of questions, not because he didn't, you know, he opened up a very interesting area. That's why. So any questions? Well, you know, are there instances where nearshoring would not work, and what would those cases be?
Definitely. So when nearshoring won't work, if there, also a few things. One, time, right? There will be a time investment in terms of working with an actual team. If you're the type of person or company that does not have time, if you say, I'm a businessman, I know marketing, I know sales, I can sell this product, but I don't have time to sit with a development team and go over requirements. I just don't have the time. Then that's something where it just won't work for you, because there will be a time investment needed. So in that regard, you might be better off with traditional outsourcing. Also, even if you have the time, if you don't have a technical background, if you don't have a technical background, or if you do not have access to someone who has at least an understanding of project management, then nearshoring may not always be for you. In our case, you can, of course, have a project manager work with you, but in most cases, we see that clients, they come to us, they have a CTO, they have a project manager, or at least a technical lead, and they know what they want, but they basically need someone else to supply them with the team that they can manage. So if you don't have time, for example, if you don't have a technical background, then it may not be the best bet starting off, unless you are able to at least have a clear understanding of what it is you really need and are looking for. And of course, another issue really comes down to whether or not you have, well, let's be honest and frank, budget, right? It's not something to get into if you're just looking to cut cost, right? Will cost be cut? Of course. We wouldn't have a business if it costs exactly the same, right? But there does need to be a conversation in regards to the investment you're making, because it is an investment. It really is an investment. And you have to make sure that you are prepared for that time investment. And money does come up as an issue. You have to be able to invest in that as well. If it's something where you're looking at budgetary restrictions that are pretty extreme, then maybe to start, you might want to go with something like outsourcing to get it maybe even cheaper, but you do lose control. So there are plenty of ways that nearshoring can work. However, there are, let's say, far more ways to make sure that everyone's on the same page so that nearshoring can work.
Is just because you need a large investment of time and IT expertise, do you feel that it makes it harder for smaller companies to do this?
Not necessarily. Now, a lot of the smaller companies that work on this particular model tend to be IT based or IT related. So typically when we have many startups, they tend to have a technical understanding, but they just can't say hire 5 people locally, right? Every situation is different. Every client is different. Every company is different. We've seen that there are companies who say, look, I don't have a technical background, but I want you to hire that person for me. And we've even had that where we've hired the CTO level person, and they're working directly with that CTO as they build the team. So what happens is they don't have the technical expertise, and the first person they bring on the team has that expertise so they can build with them. So it really depends on, everything is going to be custom or bespoke. It really depends on the situation And the only time it probably wouldn't work is if someone comes to us, for example, and says, look, I want you to make the next Facebook, but I want it to be a mixture of this and this. And I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know technically what's needed, but I know I could sell something like that. Can you make it? Then of course, yeah, that wouldn't necessarily work with outsourcing. But things like that, very vague things, that is very difficult to deal with. Just like with any project, you do need to have some serious in-depth conversations to make sure it fits for everyone.
Mm-hmm. So Mobilunity, right? What do you bring to the table in this situation? Because it seems to me that in addition to that, you're very much a human resource focused operation. So can you unpack for the audience what it is you would bring to the table in a situation where you have been approached by a company that wants to do more bring nearshoring into its operational process?
Gotcha. We are very much oriented on relationships and building those relationships. There are plenty of companies that do what we do. I mean, that's clear. If anyone's Googled nearshoring Ukraine or staffing or outsourcing, there are plenty of companies that do what we do. But most of what we try to build is the relationship aspect of it. We've not had any issues in terms of technical expertise. For us, we understand what we're looking for, so that's fairly simple for us. What's really important is, okay, how do you speak to people? How do you make the connection? When we build a team, for example, is this person the right person for the team? Right? Not just the right developer, but the right person. Is there a cultural fit? Everything, as I mentioned earlier, does depend on trust. So a lot of what we do is our cost low? Yes, of course. Do we have great developers? Of course. But there has to be that extra added bit where we have these conversations, where we build these relationships, where we talk to people, and then they basically can trust that we are trying to guide them in the right direction. Because for us, it really comes down to their success. We have to be able to guide them in the right direction, and they have to trust that we are actually not just looking out for our bottom line, but for them.
Right, right. I'm going to stop it here. I do have a question from the audience, from Julian Rees, who is a lawyer who also works with Ukraine very closely. He's actually asking a question specifically about Ukraine. Mm-hmm. I was going to do really a deeper dive into Ukraine as an optimal nearshoring destination after our next presentation. But let me put the question out there, and then let's discuss it, I think, during the Q&A. Do you see an increased demand for IT nearshoring in Ukraine, and perhaps a shift from Asia in the wake of US-Chinese tensions?
That's a good one. That's a good one. Now, I would say that, yes, we have seen a shift in demand for nearshoring in Ukraine. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's because of US-Chinese tensions, right? Is that an underlying issue? Of course. Everyone is thinking about that it's on everyone's mind, especially if you are studying the economy, if you're a businessman in IT, anything. What I really think has happened is that Ukraine has been in the spotlight over the past several years, not always in a positive way, but Ukraine has done a better job of promoting itself. We've also seen that even from Asia, say from places like Japan, they would like to actually get closer to Europe and would still like really good IT professionals, and that's moved them. Even as the governments have gotten closer, there's been some synergy, whereas the Ukrainian government has gotten closer with neighboring countries. And then you start to see more partnerships in terms of IT associations. And then people really start to understand that Ukraine has a lot to offer. Also, I think COVID hasn't helped necessarily, because people think that, oh, well, especially from a manufacturing point of view, but you have to make sure that it's consistent. And this has scared people from certain Asian locations in terms of infrastructure and the impact it's had. But so have we seen a higher demand? Yes. It's been from all over though. And anyone that's in IT, and I'm assuming, but I believe that anyone in IT, they've worked in a company where they've had Ukrainian developers, whether it be in the US, whether it be in Switzerland, whether it be in the UK. They may not have known they were Ukrainian, right? They may have heard Russian and thought, oh, Russia, Belarus, because how would you know if you don't know the intricacies of the language? But for years, it's been well known that Ukraine has a lot of talented IT professionals. Things that have happened in Asia has led people to look for other destinations, knowing that it won't be as cheap, but you'll get high quality engineers. And if we're talking about the US even, I think that the US is opening up a bit, but we're still a bit tricky when it comes to offshoring in this case, because it's so far away. But especially in Europe and Asia, we've seen increase as a company with clients from Europe, and we've seen increase even from places like Japan.
That's pretty amazing. Very, very interesting. Let's continue talking about Ukraine after our next presentation. But I think the time is ripe now to introduce our speaker. Thank you very much, Elfie. That was very interesting. So Phillip Lautier is Senior Solutions Architect at Amazon Web Services. For the last 22 years, Phillip has been leading local and remote engineering teams for small companies and large corporations in 4 different countries. This has exposed him to many different cultures as well in North America, Europe, and Asia. In 2011, he joined a Swiss startup as the Chief Technology Officer for developing, the company was developing an energy management system. Since then, and until recently, he's been working with nearshoring teams of developers in Ukraine. He's here today to share his experience. Phillip, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dorit. Before I start, I must make a little clarification in case someone misunderstands my intervention here. I'm speaking in my own name, and any opinion I would have here are only my opinions, and they do not reflect necessarily any opinion of my previous or current employer. Very important to understand. Today I'm going to share with you a little bit my experience with nearshoring. All in all, it was a very good experience. I had the chance to work with 2 different nearshoring partners, both in Ukraine for 2 different companies, and I had very similar experience. People are very qualified, good engineers, extremely good education, and also good consciousness for quality and very trustworthy people. So that's the brief overview of my experience. Now, along the way, I have learned a few things which I want to share with you, and you will see they're more on the soft side than on the hard side, like security. Security is more a matter of policy and how you enforce those policies. You need to make sure you guarantee security for yourself and your customers, and at the same time, you need to make sure people can work. They have sufficient space to work. And in my experience, there's no more risk on this level in Ukraine than there is within EU. On the administrative point of view, it's also a very similar process. We had the same NDAs in place with each individual in the nearshoring facility, and they were integrated fully into our people management process. So nearshoring, again, is about hiring a team that works exclusively for you and that you have to manage along the way to deliver what you have to deliver. When you consider nearshoring, the first thing you need to do is have a plan. Make a plan. Think long-term, and if long-term is a bit too long, at least think mid-term. It will be very different if you have an existing team in your local facility or not. You start from scratch. or not. Personally, the first time, my first nearshoring experience, I had only one developer and myself as technical resources in Zurich, and we started building an entire team in Ukraine because simply it would go faster, and as a startup in very early stages, we didn't have the financial capability to hire a large team in Zurich. If you have a local team already experienced, then it will change the landscape, and mostly it will change the profiles you have to hire first in the nearshoring. If you're a small team, you will need some leaders, some technical solid people. If you already have that, then you can afford to have a bit less senior people and ramp up faster your team. One important factor also is ask yourself what type of work, what type of output you expect from the nearshoring team. Are you going to have a group of people mostly executing testing with existing processes and really doing handwork, or do you want to build a competence center over there? That's extremely important because, again, it will define which profiles you need to hire first and how to define those profiles. The hiring time is an important factor. I would say benchmark it yourself, ask different opinion. In my experience, it's always longer than you expect, and you will spend still time hiring over there. It will be much faster than hiring in Zurich, for example, in Switzerland. But still, it's not taking just a couple of weeks to build a whole team. So plan for some months of research and hire the right profiles. Also, plan to reach a critical mass rapidly. Having just one or two persons in the nearshoring team for a long time is going to bring difficulties to keep these people motivated, to keep them in the loop, to really have a spirit of a team, and you need a critical mass. How many people it is, difficult to say. I would say at least 3-4 is really the minimum to start to create this team. You will need someone with soft skills. Let me explain that one. If you have a remote team, it means you will have to work hard on creating a bond with the mothership. You need to create human bonds between people. You need to create a team spirit that goes across the borders. And also you need to create a team spirit within your nearshoring place, because the people don't necessarily know each other when you hire. It's just a normal hiring process, and you need to create this team spirit. And we tend to forget that one or two persons in the team with a bit more soft skills, with this, how about we go for a drink after work, helps a lot to keep the team and to solve some upcoming issues you will have about salary raise, about people trying to bump the prices, and if they feel part of the story, they feel part of the team, all these little hiccups will be much easier to ride through. In my experience, the project manager, a scrum master, or a business analyst are the right persons with the right soft skills to start creating this team spirit locally, and also connecting with the other teams you might have at other places. You will also need a local technical leader. Unless everything is already covered by the mothership, if you really plan to build a competence center, you will have to have a technical leader, and you will have to visit the location very regularly, at least for 6 or 12 months. You need someone who knows the product, who knows what deliverables you want to achieve in the nearshoring, and you need to be able to give this feeling of what's going on in the mothership. How is the business doing? What are the difficulties you're going through every day? What are the customers saying? How do we sell? What do we sell? You need to give this day-to-day feeling regularly to the team in the nearshore, so they can relate to that when they make their own decisions, and when they also speak between each other on what options we have in front of us. So you need to work hard on the integration, and that means meeting regularly whenever possible. I mentioned that salary discussion will come soon. That's something I found honestly a bit painful sometimes, because I would say the iteration rate is pretty different than what we have, what I've seen in Western Europe and in North America. Typically, people will ask for salary review every 6 months. And they expect some significant changes in the salaries. To me, was a bit unreasonable, but it's also understandable because the market is really driven by demand, and they have the ability to do this. Best thing to do is have a plan and share that with your nearshoring partner. Have a plan. Don't get taken by surprise. The most successful ways I could manage that was to tell the people, you want to grow your salary. I understand that. Growing salary means you need to grow your value for the company. So let's have an education plan. Let's make sure you reach the next level in a reasonable time, and we will help you to get there. Either it's a bit with training or coaching, or we put more milestones to reach for you. You take a bit of your time also to get educated, and then when you reach these milestones, you will achieve the next level, and then we will go as you want. So get a plan early and discuss that with the nearshoring partners. They know very well how to address these cases. For a leader, a bonus is also a very good motivation to increase the loyalty and also the commitment to what you try to achieve. I had a few cases where very young developers, they just wanted to double, triple the salary overnight, and these guys, just let them go. You don't want to have these people in the team, and very honestly, it didn't happen very frequently, but it happened a couple of times, and the best thing is just let them go, because it will give the wrong signals to the rest of the team. About the culture now, because this is very important to consider when you have mixed people working in the same team. I would say that Ukraine, surprisingly, is very close to Western European culture. Now, there's a few traits that I want to share with you. Again, this is just my opinion. This is what I've noticed, and it's not a full social analysis of Ukrainian culture. They like small treats, things we do more rarely, at least in my environment here. They like small presents when you visit. They like to also travel to the mothership so they can see how you work, where you work, visit a bit around. So if you fly them to your headquarters, make sure it's over a weekend so they have a few days to go around and to visit. One event per year, all hands outside of Ukraine, is also a very nice way to say thank you first, and to also build this trust and this loyalty between the people. Know also that they count their hours. Very rarely they told me, oh, don't worry, I worked last night, it's okay, no problem. Usually they say, I worked last time, I have 4 hours in my bank, can I take them another day whenever is possible? And my answer was yes, because I don't see why not. Now it's a matter of company policy again. They are extremely respectful of hierarchy. And one of the massive difficulties I had at the beginning is to be challenged by these people. They have big expertise, they know what they're doing, but they never speak about the boss. And many times I was running workshops, and when I was asking, what's your idea, what's your opinion, or do you have a question, it was a perfect silence. Nobody would speak because I was the boss. So you have to work this out. You have to show that it's safe to say something. It's safe to challenge the leader. And the only objective you have in all of this is to do something better. And it's going to take a bit of work to be able to have them challenge you if you are in a leadership position. So make sure you make very obvious that it's safe and it's okay to challenge the boss. And you will also see that the younger engineers never challenge the more senior engineers when they are in a group. They might do it in private, but never in a group. So that's also something you need to build. Make sure there's a climate of trust that everybody can respectfully disagree and then work together toward a solution. Sometimes you can end up with long discussions once they really trust you and they start to speak. Sometimes you need to make a call, say, okay, we've discussed enough, now we need to make a decision, and let's put an end to the talk, and here is the decision. Make sure they understand the product. If you're building a competence center, make sure they understand the product. They understand what you're trying to sell. Unless it's a web shop, something they know very well. I'm in the power energy domain, and it was very hard at the beginning, and I didn't see it coming that they wouldn't understand a word of what I was saying. So I went there to do many workshops on just understanding the product, what the product is doing, how the customer uses it, so they can start to really build an understanding of everything you don't have the capability to say in a requirement specification. Have one-to-one meetings with every single person at least once, preferably twice a year. And if it means you skip a level, so you step above your local manager, it's totally fine. You want to have direct feedback in a private environment from each person. I learned a lot of things doing this, very useful. Now, about choosing the partner company. I'm not going to go very long on this. I worked with two companies, one very big one, and I worked with Mobilunity. And honestly, I preferred Mobilunity because, and I'll see address that, they go beyond just providing resources. They establish a communication and a deep understanding of your own culture, the way you want to work, and you can work on this with them so you have the right people in your team. The other thing I like very much from Alfie and from Kirill is that they are very honest in the way they give feedback. A few times Kirill told me, hey, Phillip, your marketing really sucks. You need to do something now because this is horrible. So let's do a few videos, let's do this, let's do that, so you can advertise better who you are, because you are a very interesting company, but it just doesn't come out. So they are very honest, and they are also helpful bringing solutions, which in a bigger company, what I found is that you deal mostly with an account manager who's an employee. You can get a good one, you can get a less good one. You will always have a very polite response to what you say. Not that they are impolite, but you will have a bit less straightforward, clear statement saying, hey, you need to do something there because you're getting on the wrong side. So that's it. I think we should leave space to questions. Thank you for inviting me to Shala.
Thank you, Philippe. That was extremely interesting. A lot of very important points regarding best practices of the nearshoring relationship. I was wondering if the members of the audience would like to ask Philip or Alfie a question. I don't see anybody trying to wave or so. Maybe we can pull the camera back a bit and talk about Ukraine as a good nearshoring destination. We've spoken a lot about the human resource aspect, the expertise that a lot of you know, that is available in Ukraine, and the talented workforce and excellent abilities. How about the country in a broader sense? You know, the regulatory environment. How does that all fit in with a nearshoring model? You know, if you are, you know, obviously a foreign a company that wants to establish teams in Ukraine. That's my first question. And the second question is, you know, Phillip, you talked about you're working in the energy sector and you energy management, really, with a strong software underpinning. You worked with teams nearshoring, you did nearshoring, and you had to explain to them a lot about the product itself. So here we're moving away, the focus is not IT development per se, it's another kind of product. And to what extent does Ukraine lend itself to, you know, opportunities in more traditional sectors for providing these kinds of nearshoring services? So it's really what makes Ukraine attractive in addition to the excellent human resources and the IT expertise that's available on the ground.
Okay, would you like me to take that, or? I
think maybe you, and you know, if Phillip has something to add, by all means, but let me ask you that, Elfie.
Sure. So, excuse me. I mean, when it comes to Ukraine and what makes it special, it helps to know a little bit about Ukraine, its history, also its location. Ukraine is in a very interesting spot where most people just kind of, they think that Europe stops at Poland, right? And then no one really thinks to go any further east, right? Yeah, exactly. So I think what happens is culturally, I mean, every culture is unique, but Ukraine has an interesting background with its post-Soviet history, its growth beyond that. It's experienced a lot of shifts, dynamic shifts in culture, in politics, social economical things have all shifted within the past, say, 20 years, for example, more so than you would have ever seen anywhere else. You know, I tell someone, if you look at, say, look at Switzerland 20 years ago. Was it different? Sure, but not so drastically different than what it would be now. But you look at Ukraine 20 years ago, you're going to see some major differences, and most of the differences you'll find have been positive. So what also happens is that a lot of Ukrainians do travel, and a lot of Ukrainians are really well-traveled, well-spoken, and most of the IT here, just since IT is what I know the most, tend to work with foreign companies. There isn't as much of a need locally for the IT development. So what you get here is a very interesting mix. If you walk around Ukraine, Kiev in particular, you will see this kind of mash of different things where you see something that is very uniquely Ukrainian right next to something that you would swear would be in Switzerland or Austria or the UK. You know, different types of things that you would think would be US. Then you might see a really old Soviet bloc, right? And you go, whoa, I didn't expect to see that. So because you have this interesting history, all this dynamic growth within the past, say, few decades, you're getting a very interesting mixture here. And in terms of the atmosphere, if we're talking about regulations, for example, since Ukraine is not a part of the EU, you'll still find that from a regulatory point of view, everything is basically going to fall in line with that, because in order to attract foreign investors, in order to ensure that IT still is at a high level, and it is probably the biggest driving factor in terms of GDP for Ukraine, is going to be IT and agriculture. But especially with IT, the government does put a lot of effort into ensuring that the IT infrastructure is in place and that the regulations do fall in line with what you'll find in EU member state or EEA member state countries. And from a vendor point of view, being an actual Ukrainian-based, Ukrainian-owned company, we also understand that if we're looking at legal things, but you want to make sure that your potential clients are comfortable. So we often, we have lawyers, and we make sure that everything is in line with what you would get somewhere else. And I think that is something that is very important, and something that I would hope you'd see from many providers. But taking all that in mind, the multicultural aspect of Ukraine, its unique history, it's going to be very difficult to find another place that not only has that history, but also has the size and the population. And most people don't realize that it's a huge country. It's as big as Texas. I always use that as my comparison when I talk to other Americans. It's like, it's as big as Texas. And even other Europeans know that Texas is huge. So you also get slight cultural shifts across from west to center to east, where you have everything you could want in terms of maybe old town cultural things in the west, and then a mixture in the middle, the mountains up west and northwest, the beach down to the south. It's a very interesting mixture that I think a lot of people should really investigate and experience it, and should really kind of, when things start to open up in terms of travel, I always tell people you should stop by Ukraine and spend, a couple of days at least in Kiev, and really get around and kind of see everything.
What sectors would you say are the priority sectors, the ones that are developing most quickly and bringing the most value, let's say, to the country?
Well, it's going to be anything IT related.
Yeah.
It's going to be IT and then agriculture. People forget about agriculture, but I've heard a lot of people call Ukraine kind of the breadbasket of Europe, with a large concentration of Black soil. So when you're in Kiev and maybe to the west, you see industry geared more towards large development centers and R&D investments from various organizations. There are even things now with the government to introduce new regulations for gaming and things of that nature. And then maybe further east, you get more of the agricultural aspect of things, where you get more farmland and more, I think it was sunflower and soybeans and everything you could think of that gets exported. So there's still, now you see a mixture of that too, though, where you get the IT with the agriculture, and now they're starting to feed off each other and actually grow and expand. So are there other industries? Sure, but right now it really is going to be the IT and agriculture aspect of things.
Well, those are two, very, very fascinating and essential, let's say, sectors. So I think Ukraine is in a very good position in that respect. So it looks like we've sort of reached time-wise, the end of our webinar. I found it very interesting. I want to thank our speakers, Alfie Williams, Phillip, Lautier, for sharing their expertise with us on Ukraine. I want to thank our participants. I can see that people stayed. A webinar is easy to click in and out of, but people stayed. So obviously there is something of great interest here. And I think this is the beginning of a discussion. I encourage you to approach Alfie and Mobilunity. Also, Phillip, I'm sure, can make his expertise available to you. And let's keep this discussion going. So thank you again, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, Mobilunity, Phillip, and I wish you all a good afternoon.